Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to talk about the statutory employment rights for Gaijin working in Japan. Gaijin is a term that means foreigner, so if I ever say Gaijin, you know I just mean foreigners working in Japan. Actually, on a side note, if someone calls you Gaijin, it's not necessarily rude, although it can be used as a slur, but the polite phrase is Gaigokujin. Okay, so moving on. The first thing that I want to say is I have worked in a company that I have felt pressured, I've been victimized, bullied, and basically they've tried to exploit my rights and my ignorance as a foreigner in Japan. I ended up having to leave that company and things have changed. However, I did contact a lawyer, several unions, the Labor Bureau, and various other places to get the information I needed throughout the time. So I just want to say that if you are going through any issues like this in Japan, do not worry, guys. There are places you can go, there are people to speak to. I think it's very important, no matter what country you are in, that you at least find out the basic rights that you have. Now, this may be very difficult, especially one, there's a lot of lawyer talk and a lot of legal speak. And two, there's also the chance that you're in a country where perhaps the language isn't your native language and their support of your native language is quite minimal. And I often find in Japan, English isn't really used that well here. When it is used, it's often translated very badly. So it's a very minefield kind of confusing place to be. So I'm hoping that in this video, I can help you guys out and share with you the stuff that I've learned that helped me get through the stuff I had to go through. I just want to ask guys, please feel free, if you like this video, please give me a like, a subscribe, and maybe click the bell. You know, my channel is quite new and I'm trying to share my journey with you guys, but I don't have much time. So the more you guys help, the more content I can put out, and hopefully the better stuff I can do. So in this video, I'm going to cover what to do if your employer deems it necessary to deduct pay from your wages. Overtime pay entitlement, what counts as overtime pay? Employment termination, power harassment, and where you can go for help. In Japan, there are 5 basic laws that protect all employers, whether or not you are a Japanese citizen or a foreigner. The first one is Minimum Wages Act. Then we have the Industrial Accident Compensation and Insurance Act, the Labour Standards Act, Employment Insurance Act, and the Health Insurance Act. Just a note on the Labour Standards Act, it is extremely strict and regulated in Japan. And if an employer breaks the Labour Standards Act, they can actually go to prison, be sued, or you can claim compensation. Now, I love Japan. I really do. But racism is a problem here. I'm not saying that everybody's racist, and I know racism happens everywhere. But to deny that it doesn't is just moronic. You need to keep yourself prepared. This video is for foreigners in Japan. And if you are watching this, you've probably had some issues yourself and you're trying to find answers. Or you're just one of my adoring fans. But I just want to bring your attention to Article 3 of the Labour Standards Act, which says that an employee shall not engage in any treatment that is discriminatory with respect to wages, working hours, or any other conditions based on your nationality, creed, or social status. So written in one of the strictest laws in Japan is protection for discrimination. Okay, so what do you do if your employer deems it necessary for you to pay for damages? So let's take an example. Mr. Smith. He's driving his company vehicle during work hours, and during that time, Mr. Smith is in an accident. After several days, he is told by his employer that he will have to pay the full cost and that it will automatically be deducted from his wages. What legal rights do you think Mr. Smith has? Unless Mr. Smith was driving whilst intoxicated or anything else that would make the accident 100% his fault, he cannot be forced to pay 100% of the damage. However, he may have to pay a small part. This is deemed in Japanese law as to be unfair because if the employer is using the employee to drive vehicles and gain revenue, they must be at least responsible for some part of the damages, which I think is really fair and honourable. What should Mr. Smith do if his employer deducts this directly from his wages? It's very common for the employer to automatically deduct this from employees' wages. But just because it's common doesn't mean it's legal. In fact, it's covered by the Labour Standards Act, Article 24. Wages must be paid in cash and in full directly to the workers. However, that payment other than in cash may be permitted in cases otherwise provided for by law or ordinance or collective agreement, or in cases where a reliable method of payment of wages defined by ordinance is provided for. And partial deduction from wages may be permitted in cases otherwise provided for by law or ordinance, or in cases where there exists a written agreement with a trade union organized by a majority of the workers at the workplace. Where such a union exists, or with the person representing a majority of the workers, where no such union exists. What the hell is ordinance? Now, I know it can sound a little bit confusing, but all it really means is that it's a law, a statute, or a regulation that's been enforced by a municipal body, such as a local council or the county commission. So, the Labour Standards Act, as I've already mentioned, is extremely strict. And if an employer automatically deducts money from your wages, this is illegal, and you can sue them, and you probably will win. Some facts as well, also about payments of wages that you should know, is that an employer cannot pay a third party. They cannot give money directly to friends, to debts, to pay off bills for you. It has to be paid in cash to you. Now, when I say cash here, I do, of course, mean that it can be paid into your bank account. And payment in kind is not allowed. You know what payment in kind I'm talking about. Now, let's talk about overtime pay and what is actually classed as overtime pay and what you're entitled to legally. So, overtime work is a real issue in Japan. Whilst most countries are trying to get a 4-day work week, Japanese salarymen and other workers are working 60 to 80 hours a week, sometimes 7 days a week. This is causing a lot of mental stress and a lot of health problems in Japan. Karoshi is a phrase that the Japanese use to define occupational sudden mortality. There is also a phrase called karo jisatsu, and this is a phrase that they use to describe someone who has gone through severe mental stress and has committed suicide. Now, suicide, guys, is no laughing matter. I myself have had 2 friends who have taken their own life, and it's absolutely devastating. And I'm even getting emotional now talking about it. If you feel alone, guys, and you feel suicidal, please, please, please reach out to someone. Go onto any forum, play a game, just speak to someone just to take your mind off things. You are not alone, and I know things are hard, and I am not trying in any way to diminish the stress that you are going through, but please, guys, please seek help. Okay, so before I absolutely start crying, let's move on. Mr. Thompson is a bus driver, and he drives through Tokyo, happily driving through Shinjuku, Shibuya, Ebis. And at the end of his shift, he finishes at 5. He has to fill out paperwork. Maybe there was some accidents, road construction, some mishaps, lost property, anything that might happen, he has to do the paperwork for. This takes him till 10 p.m. at night. That's 5 hours extra work after his closing time. What do you think his rights are? In Japan, generally, except for a few very special cases, overtime work is considered as doing more than 8 hours a day or more than 40 hours a week. So, just with that little bit of information, we already know that Mr. Thompson is entitled to overtime pay. It doesn't really matter if the employer has approved overtime or not, or if the employer says it's because he doesn't work hard enough or fast enough and he can't complete the stuff. The fact remains is he still worked overtime. So what if the employer denies he did overtime, and what can you use for proof? It's very important to know that if you are going to make a claim for overtime, you must support this with evidence. Now, don't panic. I know, evidence, what can I do? I know many employers turn off login systems, or maybe you don't have a tracking system. It's actually quite easy. My role as a software engineer, I have to make various Git commits to a server. I can use those as proof. I also can check the times that the server received my code, or when I logged into company emails, or even when I had my computer open and working from. You can also use emails. If you were to email friends or family members or other colleagues to inform them when you were leaving the office, that's a definite time that you can prove you were in the office for. You can also use your Suica train pass or whatever other train pass you have. That can prove the time that you went in and out of the designated stations that you've allocated on your work contract. But what actually counts as overtime? Because you can't just sit at your desk for 5 hours playing games and then email your friend and be like, hey, I just finished work. Boom, yes, extra 5 hours pay. Doesn't really fly and it's not very cool. This can be anything that is required for you to complete the working day. This could be meetings. Maybe you've had to take some phone calls. Maybe you had to stay back and sort some stuff out in the office or help someone else with their work. Or perhaps you spent a long time going to and from places for work, like travel. All this is classed as overtime. Okay, the big one, employment termination, the dismissal of your employment contract. What rights do you have? So in Japan, employment termination is extremely strict and very regulated. It's nearly impossible for an employee to be fired unless they've proved gross misconduct, unless they've proved gross misconduct or severe incompetence. Now, there are several types of contracts in Japan. So we have the seishin, which is full time. We have part time contracts, we have internships, temporary workers, freelancers, yada, yada, yada. There's menti. And it does depend on your specific contract. So always make sure that you get a copy of it and try and get a translated copy as much as possible. Now, invalid reasons for dismissal are things like anything that could cause an absence due to reasonable cause, a doctor's appointment, a bereavement, or something else. Inappropriate reasons too. Maybe the employer just feels that you don't fit into the company culture. Sorry, that's discrimination. And also, any other form of discrimination. Usually at the end of a contract, a fixed term contract, the contract will be terminated. However, it cannot be terminated if the employer did not give you an advance warning that the contract will be terminated, or if the contract has already been renewed several times. This is because auto renewal is very common in Japan, and it's kind of seen as expected unless you've been told otherwise that your contract's going to be renewed. Also, if you have worked for an employer for 5 years or more, it's outlined in the Labour Contracts Act that an employer must offer you a full-time employment, the seishin contract. You often find with ALT positions, which stand for assistant language teaching positions, they tend to move you around schools several times. So after maybe 2 or 3 years, they'll put you in a new school. This is a way that they get round quite sneakily of making sure that you haven't worked at the same place. Okay, power harassment is a big thing in Japan. My personal take is that Japan has too many middle managements that have a little bit of power, but they get too much harassment from the management above, so it just filters down, down, and down. It's not very good. This is one of the reasons that Japan has such a high suicide rate. Unfortunately, it is extremely prevalent in Japan, and it's generally described as someone who just uses their power of authority to make your day miserable, to bully you, to do anything that undermines your ability to work professionally. Imagine this scenario. Mr. Seto is a computer software engineer. He arrives to work, but his boss is ignoring him or doesn't really speak to him in meetings. He says messages like, "You don't fit in. I've spoken to the employees, you don't fit in. You're a little bit different." The boss always does things that counteracts Mr. Seto's ability to work. Like maybe he removes his access from the system, or maybe he hides things that other people have access to. So in some ways, he's definitely defining a discriminative action. Because of this hostility, Mr. Seto actually becomes depressed. He goes to work, but struggles to get in. His mind is foggy, he can't focus. In the end, he has to go to a doctor's. What do you think he can do about this? The most important thing is that if you believe you are being discriminated against or power harassment is happening, you need to get proof. Make sure you get recordings, screenshots, and as much evidence as possible. Because Mr. Seto is able to prove that he's been bullied, he can get the employer to pay for his medical treatment and compensation. Just a side note, if you are recording audio secretly, it's not illegal. It's seen that you are doing it to protect yourself in the workplace, and that's fine. Japan is a very reputation-based culture. So even if the employee becomes aware that you are taking recordings or they know they've messed up, if they then try and backtrack and then create false allegations or unprovable allegations, this is seen as very dishonorable. It sees them as them trying to make you look worse than you are because they know they've done wrong. Usually the court will straight away favor the employee in this. Okay, that just about wraps up the end of this video. Apart from, I'm just going to tell you where you can go for help. I just also want to say, guys, if you have enjoyed this video, again, please feel free to give me a like and a subscribe. It really will help me do what I love, which is explore and share my journey of Japan with you. Okay, the first places that I have dealt with personally, and I would recommend going to, is the Government Labour Bureau, which is the government organization which is in charge of making sure that employees' rights are upheld. And also, I've spoken to Tozen Union in Tokyo. Both of these places have very good English speakers. If you call these places, more than likely they're going to answer the phone in Japanese. But this is because we're in Japan. You can say Nihongo ga wakaranai, which basically says I don't understand Japanese. You can also say Eigo wa daijoubu desu ka, which translates as is English okay? You could also say Eigo o hanashimasu ka, which is do you speak English? And finally, you can say Eigo no honyakusha ga hitsuyo desu. I need an English translator. You will probably hear the words "chotto matte kudasai." And that usually means one moment, please. And they will redirect you and include a translator on the phone. And finally, I want to say you can contact the Labour Standards Bureau, different to the Labour Bureau mentioned a second ago. This is the huge government office that has basically the same powers of the police and can investigate a company down to its final point. But they do only take cases that go against the Labour Standards Act. So if a company commits any offence against that, these are the people you can. However, I just want to say that as a big organization, they are very, very busy and sometimes slow to act. And don't always just put your eggs in one basket. Always try and contact as many people for advice as possible. Which brings me to a disclaimer, guys. I contacted a lawyer for this, I spoke to some people, and I did some research. But this is not legal advice. I hope no one takes this advice and has negative outcomes. I hope it helps you guys, but I'm not responsible if anything does. Because, guys, I don't want to go to prison. I won't survive. Always check yourself or with a lawyer or with someone who is in an authority to speak on these cases before taking any action. I just want to wish you all the best, guys. And again, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully see you guys soon. Hey guys, I didn't get this solid gold statue for nothing. Like and subscribe and help me get 1,000.